Now again, this is not a beautiful modal by any means, but it does the job. So let's go ahead and, just because this was so quick, let's make it toggleable. If modal.style.display is equal to block, then hide modal, else show modal. So that's the show, and this is the hide option. Now, we can hide the modal by hiding it here, but what about that rule, DRY, don't repeat yourself? Look at that, 2 pieces of the exact same code. Why run that at all? Close modal. Refresh your page. Look at this. This toggles now. Isn't that beautiful? Now, the benefit to using functions, and we can see this clearly here, is if every time we close the modal, not only did we want to change the display to none, but what if we wanted to reset the inner HTML of the content and the title? So I'm just going to take this, copy this over, and I'm going to reset these. So the modal title and the modal content are now going to be blank as soon as it closes. So let's take a look at our code. Look at this, our modal's display is block. We have a title, we have our content in there. What happens when I close this? Well, the title is supposed to disappear. The content is supposed to disappear. Look at that, there's nothing in there now. Now it's a fresh modal for whatever comes next. And we leveraged scopes and closure. In fact, we don't have any local variables. Now, the benefit to this is, check this out. We have one function here that grabs the modal. It's used here, look at that. It's used 3 times in 2 different functions. We only ever declared it once. That's closure for you. Now we have some reason to believe in closure. What about modal title? Same thing. It's only used twice, but once in 2 functions. And content? Ditto, same thing. Now, what if we wanted to count how many times a modal has been open? Well, let's do this. Function display count. And all this is going to do is we're going to create a new element in here. Span modal count. And it's going to change, it's going to select first. Select the modal count span and change its inner HTML to a number. Now, this is one of those times where, again, I was getting too ahead of myself. And putting this in a function is actually unnecessary. That's just going to create more bloat. So anytime the modal is going to be shown, we're going to increase this number. Now, what we can do, we can use this. I'm doing air quotes here. This. And say, if this dot modal counter does not equal, is equal to undefined, this dot modal counter is equal to 0. Now, every time that the modal is shown, we can increase this by 1. And we can change the inner HTML to be whatever the counter is. Now, let's go back to our page, refresh, check our console, no errors. Opened once. Toggle close. Open twice. Toggle close. Open 3 times. And this is just going to happen over and over and over for as long as this page exists. So, there you have it. You have your own working modal. It lays on top of other content. And actually, before we do anything, why don't we create a little paragraph? And I'm just going to place a ton of these on the page. It's just lorem ipsum text. You're not missing out on anything. And when I open up my page again, refresh, look, I have all this text in here. And what happens when I open my model? Look at that. Stays right on the page with us as we scroll until we decide to close it. And we still have that counter. So there we have it. We have a full working modal. It doesn't take callbacks, and the only way you can really pass parameters to it is in the HTML, which technically is limiting, but there are JavaScript ways around that. We've used closures. We've used just 2 functions. We have written this entire thing in 32 lines of code, and it has taken us not very long at all. So you see, my point was, when you're using a framework like Bootstrap, don't get me wrong, Bootstrap is amazing, and there are incredibly talented and smart people working on frameworks like Bootstrap, but you as a developer do not necessarily need to rely on them. In just a few minutes, you made your own modal, and that means you have full control over it, to modify it, to break it, to fully customize it, not just the styling, but how it acts, when it acts, if it should automatically close. You can now control all of that. You control every aspect of that. And that is very powerful. And that's where the power of being a developer really comes in handy. Because frankly, anyone can learn how to use Bootstrap, but not anyone can learn how to write their own modal. So there we have it. We have our first modal. Feel free to dissect this code. If you want to, actually, even try to make this nicer, make it better looking, give it more functionality. If you're familiar with callbacks, give it a callback. See what you can do with it. If you're afraid of breaking code, don't be, because you can always re-download this. It's totally fine. And more than anything, what I really want you to gain from this particular project, aside from practice writing more code, is the ability to look at yourself as an actual developer. And in the next lesson, I'm going to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and what it essentially is. I'm not sure I have a solution for it, but I'm going to tell you my views on it. It has nothing to do with writing JavaScript. It just has to do with being a developer. But as a developer who's learning JavaScript, you have a very high probability of running into imposter syndrome. It can affect your performance as a developer. It can hold you back in life from taking on opportunities that would otherwise be extremely exciting for you. And I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to take what you have learned and apply it and be the best damn developer you can be.